Hi, I'm Seamless, and it's time for a new how to bass tutorial, and today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. So recently I went through this whole thing with my analog hardware stuff, and I have like this head now for these like 16th note sequences that are really just like a note and then you go for it. It don't have to be a note. Most people don't just do a note, but like when you're testing this stuff, you usually just let a note run and it goes. So and along with doing that, it gained for me a whole new appreciation for a lot of the house genres, a lot of the more progressive genres as well, especially ones that relied on a lot of like older tech to become a thing. It's something lots of stuff makes a lot of sense now. So I was exploring this idea in terms of like what I would do in like a digital environment, and I realized that the last time I had done something like that was I made like a sequence for my song "Back" on the Wizard Bass EP. So I figured I should revisit this because also, having worked with the hardware stuff, I have a whole new appreciation for the digital wizardry that is the ability to make superstars on command, because that's a whole thing, in the other worlds there, and so I decided to also make this video about why Harmor. I always talk about how Harmor is like the coolest thing for superstars, but like now with the perspective of like, you know, how hardcore like the digital stuff really is now, and like how far it's come really too is also just a huge deal. So this is a kind of really basic sort of solid, like super solid trancey thing, but this is one Harmor and one Maximus. I think there's not anything else. Yeah, that's it. There's other crap going on over here because I was testing this mic setup. I have a mic arm now instead of a mic stand on the side. I have a much better organization now, and so I had to reroute a whole bunch of stuff, but testing is done, but it's only just the one Maximus, the one Harmor, and the work that Harmor has done here is equivalent to like a lot of stuff that you would have to do, not just in the hardware world, obviously. Like, damn, you need a lot of stuff in the hardware world to do anything this thing did, but like in comparison to traditional FM or subtractive bass synthesis, it's the exact opposite of what I was trying to say. Because of a lot of things, and people who have followed my channel a lot will probably already know a lot of all this stuff. But you know, it's good to kind of revisit some of these things. And also, I did a few things in here that are a little bit new, just again, born of experience from the hardware world. Also, I want to point out that currently we have I have mathing like nine. The end of this month is the end of the summer sale that I have for the lessons going on right now. Right now, lessons are $40 a pop for an hour Skype session. You just email me, we schedule it, it's fine. There's details in the link in the description of this video. The sale ends on the end of this month, and it goes back up to $90. I think. I might have actually set another price at some other time. I'll find out what that price is, but I'm pretty sure it was $90. Point is, end of sale coming soon. Also, I have a Discord server. Check that out if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Description, links, go for it. The sound. So the sequence, like, you know, you play a bunch of 16th notes, and then you do like a lot about operating hardware is manipulating just super basic stuff, like just there even being a note, like especially the modular stuff. It's mostly just about like assembling an idea of a voice before you even do anything about it. Like the big terrible secret about that stuff is that you're going to spend most of your time like building the platform on which you will then start to create things. And then, like, you have to also be creative about how you build the stuff, otherwise you won't be able to do some of the things you want to do. It's very challenging. I like it. It's pretty good. So like coming back. That's not like I went anywhere, but like, you know, coming to sort of like do the same sorts of things in the digital world. It's we'll see. So like the first thing I did in making this thing, like I'll just open up a new Harmor just to illustrate what I'm talking about. And also a new pattern, so we have stuff going on. I don't know how that got. Okay. This guy. Control. All right. So filter Pluck, right? You make your kind of like trancey, techno-y, like driving bass. I know I'm at 110 right now, but that's just because I was screwing around with tempo to see how it felt. Oh my god, am I getting sick? I felt fine. It feels fine. Sure, whatever. Anyway, envelope, point down on a filter. Get your Pluck. In Harmor, the beauty of using filters is that everything is by nature, by default, perfectly linear phase. If you have any meaning at all, idea of what that means, just understand that it means that like the motions you do don't actively destroy the integrity of your sound like regular filters do. And along with that, the filter controls you have are super precise. And so like, you know, I don't even do a lot with it. I just kind of turn this on like this. And what the width does is it changes the shape of the filter. Like all these shapes that are in here are just different versions of applications of this environment right here, where you see these line graphs where you can change the shape of the filter, and then it just applies it, you know, flip it over onto the side, put it up on the spectral display, and then you get what the filter's doing. And the low pass filter is just some simple shape that looks kind of like that, right? So the width means we're getting a difference between like this shape coming off it pretty sharply, or like this shape coming off it very loosely. And that gets us a harsher or softer Pluck. A harsher or softer and sharper. Wow. I can't even imagine where I was going to go with that. But the importance of this is that the next step after doing what I like the softer version, to be honest. Also, we're going to go to tempo to make sure that the envelope we're doing even exists in the time frame that we could even act on, because we're doing 16th notes here, which means any automation that we're doing after that is not really going to matter. Unless you decided to have notes that are longer than that, but for this particular exercise, I am not. Comment in the video below if you think what I just said was too fast. Because I felt like that was pretty fast, but I also felt like I got that like across pretty well. If that wasn't well enough, let me know, because that will actually adjust how well, you know, I decide to slow down a little bit. So when you're doing a Pluck and Harmor, thing to consider is that in the Advanced tab, there's a whole host of parameters that affect how sharp any given Pluck can be. Oh, but actually, before we get to that part, let's come back to that first thing I mentioned. I think when I said that the first thing I did, besides the actual literal first thing, which is the Pluck here, but it's actually this phase randomness knob up here. And the badass nature of this phase randomness knob is that it gets us somewhere that like normally you'd have to do a lot of work with a lot of stuff to get in like regular subtractive synthesis. Not even just hardware stuff, but like not additive stuff. It turns the saw wave, the harsh sharpness of the saw wave, into the lush cloudiness that we love to get in those super saws. How the hell does it do that? Well, it's because of what I said about the additive nature. And if you have missed this before about Harmor, Harmor is an additive synthesizer. What it means is that this spectral visualizer we're looking at right now, we're looking at it playing, this isn't like an EQ, like measuring what has happened. It's essentially the information that it's giving it to play, which was going to happen. And it's doing so individually. Every one of these little points of light you're seeing is an individual harmonic. Or at the very bottom, it's a fundamental tone, but then everything else is a partial. There's terminology, but the point I'm trying to, wow, can I talk today? The point I'm trying to make is that we have individual control over a lot of things about each individual thing here. And one of that is phase. And the phase is really the key to all of this. Phase is the whole shenanigan of why we even do super saws. Because when you play a saw A and saw B together and everything about them is the same, they might as well be one saw. But if you change pitches, they run out of speed a little bit and they get out of phase. And this change, this out of phaseness, gets us this lushness as it breaks up the singularity that is the rigid harmonicness of the higher harmonics. Everything about what makes a saw wave sharp has to do with the fact that the phases are aligned perfectly. So anything that screws with the alignment of the phase gets you like a reduction in the sharpness until you are ruined completely, and you get a completely soft, like basically noise. So the phase randomness now, what this does, there's actually two sides to it. There's the middle, which is just it's together, and then there's phase running, which is that it will randomize where in the phase it starts, but it does keep everything aligned in phase. And then there's spectral randomness, where it does what I just described, where every single harmonic is completely independent, where it's going to start in phase if it's its own individual sine wave. And that gets us, almost noise. But still basically a note, because it's close enough to the harmonic range. It's not, we haven't used actually any pitch change at all, so everything's still the same pitch to elicit this change. So the lovely thing about it is that we're still like, we haven't, a lot of the detriment that you get when you have to get this far with a regular supersaw, right? When you get like your 40 voices or whatever in massive, or like 6 or 7, I don't know really how much it takes, to be honest, because this is just a lot easier to do this way for me. You get like this sort of motion problem. Well, same thing with the filter. Like if you're doing anything other than linear phase stuff, which, like, if you've ever tried to automate linear phase things, it's not a good time most of the time. And the like reality is that all of these things like kind of just screw up the tone of it. Like you do all the stuff that you do all later, like the layering, the processing, the having a big layer one with lots of change of pitch, and a thin one with not so much change of pitch, so they come together. All of that stuff is because of that you basically don't have control over your phase. And something like Harmor, an additive synthesizer, all you have is control over your phase and pitch and stuff like that. But point is that like you can just go there, you can get right to that end result without having to go through all the rigmarole, and then you can do all the rigmarole. Which is pretty much what everything else was going on in the other Harmor, which I'll get to in a second, because I want to explain what's happening in this window here, because sharpness is key. Bombs are key. The keyness of the sharpness that I'm trying to talk about has to do with the ramp knob, the smooth mod knob, I think, it might not in this case, and the the grain knob. It says grain, and the full name of it is envelope granularity. I'm actually, for what I did just here, I guess it does matter. I'll just do this so I can illustrate my point. The bendy curve that I did here on this Harmor. To answer your question, yes, I do have 12.5. No, I'm not recording with it just yet because I honestly forget sometimes. But I know some of you are going to think about asking me that. Anyway, ramping, what this does is basically a form of declicking. And it's not like the literal declicking, which is a little more uniform. I think is a spectral consideration in ramping. I think it might be note-based, because if you think about it, a click. Actually, this is something that this is going to be kind of a giant tangent. This preset is in the description of this video, by the way, if you want to go download it and you don't want to hear me tell you about how this works, because really just a bunch of parameters moving around. You can just go see what I did. But like, I really want to tell you about some of this stuff. Actually, I have to have a visualization for this. So I was trying to make kicks, right? And if you ever have like this really nice kind of like epic sharp kick, and then you can press everything together, and then you note that like the kick is too long, that like the bass in the kick is just blowing everything away, and you're going, okay, there's not enough room in the mix for this thing. So you have a lot of options available to you, but like, what if you could just shorten it? Just shorten it up so much, because it really didn't feel like it was that long before you compressed everything. So you might as well just shorten it so that it feels like the correct length. Not to mention the stuff that it completely ruins when you do that, like all the weights and things and measures and collectedness of the song is now different because of this. But one of the things that happens is that suddenly this just ugly tone shows up. Like, what was once a nice clean sub becomes this like gargled, like mid-destruction of a tone, and you're thinking to yourself, I don't remember doing things that would make that do that. And you might have noticed that it's actually entirely about how fast you actuate down the volume. And really, it all comes down to wave shaping. Everything I've ever talked about how like the dynamic processing is all about like compressing and wave shaping and distortion and all that, the same thing. It's all about manipulating things faster than the waveform. Well, you can, as it turns out, turn volume off and make an envelope that is faster than your sub's oscillation, which isn't even that difficult, because like 40 or 50 hertz of a kick is actually pretty low. So like an LFO or regular envelopes can go faster than that very easily. And not to mention, like, think about how fast you're making these kicks anyway with like your pitch mods and that kind of thing. Point being is that if you have this nice clean sub and you rake it down like faster than it can go down into its own zero crossing, you're going to add harmonic content to that. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be like a harmonic distortion, which is why you get that grody kind of mid-rangey business. So like, the solution to this is you basically have a limit as to how fast a particular frequency could be before that particular distortion sets in. So like, if your bass is so low that it can go so fast, and if it's faster than that, then you can cut it faster. And if it's slower than that, then you can't. If you want to avoid this particular grungy sound. I've noticed a lot of dubstep, like full on the pop end of like the touring DJs kind of have kicks that all have that quality to it. And I just guess they don't care. That's fine. If you don't care, then whatever. I mean, I kind of care. It sounds a little grody to me. But I've also made tracks that just done that because I've just given up on it. But, because at the end of the day, like, it's a particular quality of a kick that I'm not focusing on that much. It's like, I can EQ out the end result, but it's just not, it's not as pretty and elegant as just leaving the original phase, everything nicely aligned. So I actually I managed to like get a pretty decent like low end out of that. But point is, the ramping business in Harmor, I'm pretty sure, if we're coming back to this, that it's like declicking, only declicking is a solid sort of time for the whole harmonic stack. Ramping is tailored individually to the individual notes so that it won't do that as much. I really hope that's what it means, because I don't know that it even elaborates on that, honestly, in the manual. I sure hope it does, but even if it doesn't, keep that in mind for making cakes, because it's really important. Anyway, point being, bring it down and make it sharper. Now, how sharp, like, how much high frequency activity you want in that snap is basically by determining how fast that is. So, like, if it's all the way off, all the way to the center, then it's, like, super sharp. Look at that. And then if you slow it down a bit, not so sharp. So, like, you know, how sharp you want, just do that kind of thing. It's not really a good or bad version of that, you know, just do what you need to do there. The envelope granularity is about essentially calculating this curve here. Because if we think about how audio is calculated and generated, everything has to do with the sample rate, right? So given that, I have to wonder why we ever thought, if ever we did, because I certainly didn't. It didn't even really occur to me at all to think about it, but if I had, I would not have occurred to me to think that automation obviously has to be sampled too. I don't know that it's sampled that fast. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's not, because, like, you know, the whole audio rate thing that I keep bringing up is about being able to move automation that fast. Automation is interpolated like anything else. Point being is that when you see a curve like this nice and clean looking curve, it doesn't actually come out that way in terms of the real automation. There's a little bit of like polygonization that goes in to like the curve to compensate for however fast that particular motion needs to be for a given moment. But that envelope granularity is essentially telling you what that resolution is. I could have just gone there to look to see how fast it was without having to speculate about its, you know, rate, because there it is. 3 milliseconds is essentially how the lowest amount of like polling, I guess, and like how maybe we could even tell that. So like 3 milliseconds is the 1, 3, right there is 3 milliseconds. So if any curvature that you did to an automation clip that existed between those 2 points wouldn't count, essentially. It wouldn't be pulled, at least I assume. I don't know, perhaps it would sample, like, some kind of super sampling involved for there being more points, but, or maybe we would just skip the points in between. That's actually probably a smarter idea. They would skip the points, and then calculate, the curvature in milliseconds afterwards. Point being is that, when you want that curve to really be that curve, you want to bring that granularity all the way the hell down. And it goes down to as far as 0.5 milliseconds, so it's still not perfect, but it's way better. And it's especially important if you're doing ultra snappy stuff. And also when I'm screwing around with like kicks and a few times doing snares and stuff in here, that's also very important for percussion to get that kind of sharpness. Same thing in citrus. I actually called it citrus. Wow, citrus. Up here in this high quality envelope button, which is on in the render, by the way. If you don't pay attention to it, like, it'll render with this thing on. But if you have it on, if you don't have it on in the draft mode, which is what you're hearing when you play it, you don't get the perfect curve. Cool. All right, come back to here now. Huge freaking tangent. I really hope that wasn't a problem. Cools. So, got the harmonic randomness. I brought a little bit back there to get some of that sharpness back in there. Just Unison doing his deal. One thing that's kind of interesting is that because we're doing this 16th note thing every time reliably, there's a new automation option open to me, and that's automating the phase parameter directly. You might be asking yourself, well, I could have done that whenever. What the hell are you talking about? And what I'm talking about is that it doesn't actually change its phase in real time. It doesn't, it'll move it around, and then the next note will trigger it at that phase, whatever it is at that second. So regularly when I'm using this stuff with like whole held notes, it's not really viable to automate the phase. But because we're triggering it at every 16th, there, it's essentially like stepping, and it's actually a lot like how you do the hardware stuff. If you think about it, like a lot of hardware sequence parameters don't move. They just get stepped along with whatever trigger gets shown up. Like an analog sequencer has you can't really see this very well, but like you can see a matrix of knobs or whatever, and it's just like a set of levels that get shot out, and then those levels move or have different knobs for every step, and so you have different parameter level for that one step, and then that just moves things around. Like that's how step automation works with analog sequencers. And so like this is how that would go down. And it's interesting that like moving into the space of thought allowed me to be like, okay, well, this is a parameter that traditionally wouldn't actually move ever, but because we're playing so many notes, it is almost as if it is. And I'm also automating the pitch, which is giving us that alteration in tone going around. Like, particularly here is the last thing in here. The automation looks kind of bungled up because I had the snap on the wrong snap, and I haven't just cared to change it back. But I'm also like the filter thing that I'm doing here is just a regular low pass filter, and I'm automating up the filter frequency, and I'm also automating the envelope amount around. You saw me screw with it in the other demonstration with this knob here, and what this does is essentially it changes how much this particular shape affects it. So like this is all the way up, it's doing it. Okay, it's just doing the shape as you see it, and then all the way down it's not doing it at all. So, and then I set this automation clip to have the center value to be the minimum value, so that like when I automate all the way down at the bottom is just off, so I don't have to think about it. And so when it's up all the way up here, you're basically filtering it like you're doing the regular pluck, and then when it's all the way down here, it's off like you're just playing a note. And then we have just the regular pluck, right? The regular filter. And you might be asking yourself, why is it still plucking? And it's because other things are plucking. Pluck you. Anyway, that's the broken one. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, along with the filter, I'm also plugging volume. And this little shape here is me avoiding making it like just too snappy. This isn't really just the clicking. It's actually, I had a lesson recently and someone wanted me to do a sound a little bit like this, and the key that I missed was just in that like it wasn't a perfect pluck. There was a little bit of an actual sustain going on in there, and that enabled you to actually hear the tone for a second before it plucked down, and that is actually surprisingly powerful. I also separated the sub in an interesting way, and I come back to what we talked about before about how this is all de facto linear phase, and how we haven't really changed anything's pitch, save for like the pitch modulation I'm doing because of the unison, the real unison that's happening too. On top of all this, remember we're doing all this on top of like the magic of the phase control. This means that like even though we're way down here in the basement of the sub frequency level, my phase profile is so intact that I don't really need to worry about like the traditional levels of like high passing, and in terms of like I need to save it from itself, right? But I went a step further anyway, just because I wanted to be perfect, because it can be. And what I did here is in the EQ, in the global EQ inside Harmor, I just cut off the bottom filter, and then in B part just brought it back, and then B is just the low end here. So what I think is clever anyway, thing about this is that the reason we want to protect the sub is because it's so slow. It's so slow that like any problem that you have with it is magnified, and you're more easily able to detect things, especially with like phase related and pitch related problems. So when you're doing like a super saw, which is primarily that, it becomes a big issue when all this stuff is going down in the bottom. My face is like exploding. Wow. Am I having an allergic reaction to something? I really wonder what though. It's been cleaning recently. Anyway, point being, normally what I would do to do that, like if I want to be really, really, really perfect, I would like go into local EQ and do this. And this is essentially the same thing, only note following. So this means that like the 3 bottom harmonics, if I wanted to do like this, for example, of the whole thing would always be the perfect sub. But like I'm sure you may have noticed when you make your secret subs, your separate subs and your big mixes, that like high note subs, if they're not like properly leveled right, don't sound right. Especially when the quality of your sound is dependent on whatever damage your processing has been doing, right? So the value of doing it with the global EQ, where essentially that this value is not changing, is that like the tone that we need of like that mid-range lowness is always going to be the same, even if the fundamental frequency of a high note occupies that space. That one won't be. It's not like we're protecting that particular frequency. We're protecting it if it enters that particular range. And the lower it goes, the more protected it is. So we end up like having utterly perfect control of like the picture of our like presence. A whole bunch of words that were meaningless, I know, but like I want to impress upon you the kind of control you have over this stuff, because this sort of thing is usually goes out the window when you're talking about like big supercell based things because of how much just destruction happens, and like layering needs to happen as a result of that to solve problems. And this is the thing that like blows everything about analog processing out of the water. It's not even necessarily that analog couldn't do this, because it's really like the theory of it has always been there. The theory of it is basically just that science of how sound works, right? But the barrier has always been control, has always been that like analog oscillators are free and wild and ridiculous, and then you get digitally controlled oscillators and digitally controlled this and that and the other thing, and if you want to have 500 of these things, they need to be that, because just analogness and like CV controlled whatnot, it wouldn't really fly. I mean, we knew that already because of the wild popularity of the DX7 when it was new, because that level of control afforded you actual processing with FM versus FM like running out of steam after three chains of it, because your pitches could never be aligned for long enough. Yeah. Anyway, after that, another new thing I did was to screw around with this lever. This guy up here is essentially the FX and dry mix of the whole thing. And what's a little bit cool is that I didn't actually end up using the compressor in here because I'm using Maximus, but when I was briefly considering doing that, I noted that by default, the dry mix is beneath the compressor, which is clever, because this dry mix is essentially this lever here. I'm calling it a lever. And if you bring it back up there, then the compressor will essentially be also included in your modulation of that there. But you can also put it below something else, which is interesting and for future considerations. But what I was doing with it is that I have a whole bunch of effects on, like big stuff. Reverb, a little bit of chorus is not very audible, but I need it there to just kind of bring back some destruction, because to be perfectly honest, some of the tone that we're used to hearing in like more traditional feeling saws and stuff are a result of a lot of this the things you have to do to fix for just problems. But so not all of it's bad. That's what I'm saying, because this is very rooted in that particular kind of a cheaty process, very phase destructive process, this chorus business, and then delay and reverb and all that crap. So then what's happening here is that this is being articulated to do a bunch of stuff. Now, I'm really pretty sure that all the way to hell up here is all the way off. And now I'm starting to think that this is actually pre-effects somehow, despite what that list suggests. And I have messed around with the list while I was doing it to know that the compressor does affect it if I move it, because the effects are still applied if you still come back out. It's still on. You know what I mean? It behaves very much as if I'm automating an input versus an output of an effect chain. But it does accomplish the point, which is that like I want the presence of the effect, but I don't want the tail, especially when I'm changing notes and when I go to higher automations. When I come back down off those big automations, I want it to like come back down, versus kind of flying around for too long. It still does a little bit. So to be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% sure what that did. I know it did something, but I'm also compressing the crap out of it. So whatever it's gonna do is gonna be a little bit diminished. Anyway, compression wise, I'm centering the lows a little bit, but there's no spread on the lows at all. I turned off, I cloned the patch, because if you go in, just to be safe, if I want to maintain the structure of it all, if you go in here, you can go to copy preset, and copy part, and go to B, paste part, and then I just turned off all of the pitch stuff, all the unison, the prism. Oh yeah, I have the prism on, derp. So this business, normally when you see the prism, you see that you see the sine wave going on all the way through it, and that just makes all the pitches change in a bunch of different directions. That's what this thing does. Oh yeah, and I also messed around with the harmonic unison pitch window. Look at that too. Jeez, I'm on point today. This is like a 40-minute video. My God. So what this is essentially saying is that as these particular frequencies get higher, they go up higher a little bit in pitch. This guy isn't being automated at all, I don't think. No, it's just on there, and this is kind of like single voice unison. You've seen me, if you follow my channel, I'll mess with this window a lot, which is the harmonic unison pitch window. And this affects the unison, which is when unison happens, you have your one voice of your whatever synth you're having, and then you get unison voices, and it spreads it in pitch. You get some that are higher in pitch and some that are lower in pitch. With what the harmonic unison pitch window does is this particular value of how much it's going to be different in pitch one side or the other is independent now per harmonic. So it could be more spread, but only for higher harmonics, or less than for the lower ones. In this case, we're doing less for the higher ones and more for the lower ones, because that kind of that Euro-y, which is a weird thing to say, but that Euro-y feeling of those anthemic leads you hear on big main stage like trance sets. That warbleness to it is actually a lower frequency, not lower frequency, but like lower partial relationship. So like the lower frequencies in the whole setup, like the stack of the frequencies of the harmonics of your note. The first couple of harmonics are the ones that are doing it. So that's why I still had that business there. But when the filter opened up, I wanted the top end to be smooth. So this is usually where you have your layering come into play. This is usually where you have to have a whole other sound come in to be your top end, because you can't have in this non-additive world, you can't have the same unison be bit dense in the low end and not dense in the high end. But because this is Harmor, because we're using additive synthesis, we can do that. Like some kind of golden god. What have we done? What has science done? I, for one, welcome our new Belgian overlords. Wow, I apparently was doing something crazy with the other one, but now I'm not. Turned it off, as you see. Anyway, am I automating this? I was automating it, but then I decided against it and instead automating it out here. Yeah. And then the Maximus itself continued. Compressing it pretty hard in the lows and the mids and the highs. Lows, I don't need to compress. Don't need to compress. How do I know when I need to compress? That's a question I get a lot. And the answer to that question is wide and varied, but to get at the answer to the question, you have to ask yourself, what is the point of compression and why are you using it on your sound? Which is like the question you just asked me, but like I'm just reframing it for you so that you can sort of answer for yourself, because ultimately you're gonna have to. Obviously the mechanical purpose of a compressor is dynamic range, right? You're controlling dynamic range. Watch what this looks like coming in, right? So I upped the gain to get it up at 0 dB, which wasn't a lot, and like just to so I could like just frame it right. And I did that for all of them. And I must have changed a bunch of other crap after I did that, because this is not what it looked like afterwards. Oh yeah, it's because it's a very low filter. Derp. I'm derping hard today. If you look at like the whole filter, like the Pluck concept, right? This is like precisely what the hell this is. Unless I wanted to get into like seriously high rate transient shaping, which I honestly could just do with Harmor, like in there. Like you have to ask yourself where you want to solve your problems, right? So like a problem would be like if all of these points were jaggedly in the wrong angle or whatever, or there was some like low frequency bleed going on because of the phase cancellation going on at low frequency because of supersaw business. But like none of those problems exist. So I don't have to compress anything up at the low end. It's perfect. It's exactly what I want it to be. The mids and the highs, however, are like, get somewhere with the has-beens and mids and highs. All right, so like you hear that like snap going on in there. The original input was not so generous with its impact. So here's what it was going in there, and then here's what is coming out there now. So like a little bit of it is that it's ladder, and a lot of it is that this big ass like spike is coming out of it. So, when you use expansion like this, and you put on a little bit of attack, I'm honestly not totally sure why, but it likes to shoot up the initial volume like hardcore. It's the opposite of what I think it should do, given that like typically to get that result, you want to use a compressor like it's supposed to be used, where you have a threshold in the ratio, and then you put a little bit of attack on it, and that lets some of the shoot come through, and then that gets to your attack. But given that we're doing sort of not that, or rather, given that like we're doing that, but it should be that if you wanted to adhere to the curve, and the attack is essentially telling it not to adhere to the curve for a second. That's what the attack is doing, right? So how is not adhering to this meaning it goes louder than the curve would have anyway? I'm sure there's answers to this question, and I'm actually sure I could just again read some manuals, but like it doesn't seem to make sense, does it? Maybe one of y'all could tell me what's going on in the comments and help educate me and everyone else. Anyway, same deal with the high frequencies, and like I really wanted that snap to come on through. Like I wasn't going to keep the snap because it's a lot of snap. It's a lot more snap, than necessarily is necessary. Necessarily is necessary because as you can see, and when we go up to the actually main compressor here, I have the attack all the way off, and that's because this attack is actually different than the attack that's going on over here. And actually, the attack that this is the same thing that this knob is over here, which is also off because this knob is this knob for these guys. Anyway, but what's happening here is that I'm letting the release be kind of long. I'm not looking to like burn this guy. I really want that snap to be in there, but I want it to be consistent, right? And like you could see it. You could see that this was not going to add up to consistency. but now it does. All right, there it is. So here's what like the multi-band compressed signal looked like when it was coming in, and now this is what it is here. So here's another answer to why you want to compress stuff, right? This is actually the traditional answer to why you want to compress stuff. When your levels are just crazy and you want them to be even, you can make them even. And now even that answer I could feel. Some of you are like, okay, I think I've always known that, but I don't think I ever knew why I cared enough to want to make them even. Why do we care about making them even? There's a name for the thing about what it's called, but essentially what it is that our ears don't hear any kind of frequency curve linearly based on level. Which is to say that like if you have like white noise and you EQ'd it to be a particular curve and then you turned it up, that curve would be different to our ears. If you turn it down, it would also be different to our ears. It's a little bit weird, but as a result of this, if you mix something that sounds right at a particular dB and then that gets louder or quieter, essentially your mix changes, right? So that means you want as much consistency and level as you can get so that your mix is right always. For, as much as possible, right? Because you want some variation level, and some parts of that even are built into sort of an idea of what someone is doing. But this is not one of those cases. And this is a case where, like, at the end of this, we want a controllable kind of consistency. So we're going to crush it. We're going to bring it down so that all the points are particularly even. I say crush, but, like, really, it's slapping it a bit particularly hard. But because I'm going a little bit soft on the release time there, it's preserving every piece of it just fine. It's just bringing the level down. You can tell that like I'm sacrificing a lot of like what could be a lot less headroom, but that isn't the goal. And like all the other stuff I did in here was also like was sort of like more sound designy than mixy. Like this was like I want snap. I want to hear what like more punch, more presence, more evenness. Like that was all like not super objective. And oh cool, my camera just died or something. Man, okay. That's a sign I have to wrap this up. So I'm just going to turn that off. Boink. Anyway. Yeah, we're almost done anyway. So point being, why you want to compress it can vary from moment to moment, but there are, like in this example, I knew that I was going to want to get this kind of sound design result, and then afterwards to bring it down somewhere that can be like mixed into. Of course, I didn't need to do anything afterwards because, in terms of the EQ stuff, because I managed to like, again, because of the I look in the camera, I can't even see me. Because of the whole idea of how much of it we could preserve from the get-go, how much of it we didn't have to destroy to get as far as we did before we used things like actual unison and actual chorus and actual reverb and delay, that kind of thing, which do convolute stuff pretty hard, and Prism as well, and that they all encouraging new and interesting kinds of phase cancellation in very high frequency realms. But we also got the important parts of like the big anthemic supersaws of every range, not just the bass stuff, but also for this is also great like chord material, not this little sound, but like this process is exactly the exact same process, just as it is a similar process for every supersaw. But like the phase randomness was just a big kicker, right? And like if you're against it being random, because it is random, it's a different set phase every time, you also have individual control of every single oscillator's phase. If you wanted to do it manually, you can, or like my particular favorite thing to do is just to put up a line here and then go wave, and then this is pretty good randomization of phase. To be perfectly honest, you can fuck it up even more if you want, but like that I usually do that if I want to get that kind of smoothness that like the randomness got me, but I want it the same random. I don't want it to be random. I just don't want it to be random. I could have also used a Hertz bow, which would have further exemplified additive nature to be something that's just ridiculous control of unison. But in this example, because I've already used randoms up there, I could use more regular unison modes. Although uniform is a little bit special too, but I could use more regular unison modes to. That sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Did I just like what would that do? Someone tell me what that would do. Anyway, regular unison modes that are more reliant on traditional pitch changes and that kind of thing versus spectral pitch changes. Anyway, as I said, long before, in a land before time, and before this video, 800 years ago, this preset, this project, will be available to download in the description of this video. Actually, no, I am just gonna, no, I'm not, I have automation, it's a project. Also, don't forget, if you're interested in lessons, check out the link in my description for information about the sale going on currently. And if you want to hit up my Discord, go for it. People are there. We chat about stuff. It's a good time. If you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all the good stuff. And as usual, please have a nice day.